Good morning, everyone. Very warm welcome to all the professionals, students, faculty members, colleges, and others from different walks of life for joining us today for the 16th interaction in the series, Sense and Sensibility. This session is special as we gather on the morning of October 1st, just a day before Gandhi Jayanti. Today's event is dedicated to Mahatma Gandhi, and we have an exciting session ahead exploring Gandhi's places. We will look at the significance of the places connected to Gandhi's life and how they reflect his ideas and principles. We're truly honored to have with us our esteemed panel of speakers, Professors Neelkant Chhaya, Riyaz Taibji, and Pradeep Surud, who will share their insights from their important work, Gandhi's Places, and architectural documentation. A few months ago, I was pleasantly surprised when I was requested to review Gandhi's Places, an initiative by the Ministry of Culture, Government of India. It certainly is a masterpiece that documents the places and buildings that define Gandhi and in turn were defined by him. The compilation of drawings and reflections showcased in this book, they're a treasure trove of information for those who avidly follow Gandhi, as well as for those with an academic interest. For architects, the narratives that led to the illustrations kindle introspection. The editors, Neelkant Chhaya, Riyaz Taibji, and Pradeep Surud, have done a fine job of orchestrating a pleasing symphony of plans, elevations, sections, which are really simple illustrations echoing the sentiments of a simple life. I was delighted to be taken on a tour of all the places that touched Gandhi through this book and were in turn touched by him. And this narrative really held me in thrall once again about the power of design to change lives, and vice versa for that matter. How people live can and should dictate how we design. It again led me to the question, what are monuments? And brought me to my pet term of these days under our action area board, invisible monuments. I have so many thoughts buzzing through my mind, and I'm actually looking forward very excitedly to hearing these three authors tell us about the making of this compendium. This session falls under one of our 6 action areas of Ethos Foundation, SAAT, which stands for Sustainability in Action and Thought, specifically focused on environment and infrastructure. As many of you know, who know our works, know that there is information on multiple recognitions, awards, and grants that can come your way at the end of this session. So stay tuned. Sonam mentioned that at the start as well. As a part of how we do things, we like involving colleges and students. I think the strength is always in the collective, and when they are involved is when they kind of imbibe so much more. And hence we have, youngsters who are going to be handling the sessions today. We have Arya Charthal, a second-year student from Brick School of Architecture, Pune. We have Manvita Vutukuri, fourth-year student from Meganzuti, who will be introducing the session and the speakers. Over to you, Arya and Manvita.
Thank you, Geeta ma'am. I find great inspiration in the connection between design and society, especially through the lens of Gandhian principles. The spaces are a reflection of personalities, and I'm sure we will learn a lot today through their latest book, Gandhi's Places and Architectural Documentation. It is my honor to introduce our distinguished speakers for today, Professors Neelkant Chhaya, Riyaz Taibji, and Pradeep Surud. These estimated scholars have made significant contribution to architecture, teaching, and documentation. Let me introduce the first speaker of the event, Professor Pradeep Surud. He is a scholar of political science and cultural history, with a deep focus on Mahatma Gandhi's life and thoughts, as well as the social and cultural history of modern Gujarat. He previously served as director and chief editor of Sabarmati Ashram Preservation and Memorial Trust, where he also established the Gandhi Archives. To introduce our remaining distinguished speakers for this session, I would now like to invite Manvita to take over. Over to you, Manvita.
Thank you, Arya. Our next speaker is Professor Neelkant Chhaya. He is an architect and academic who has practiced in Ahmedabad since 1987. He taught at the Faculty of Architecture at CEPT University, retiring as Dean in 2012. Professor Chaya has also taught at the University of Nairobi and Vallabh Vidyanagar and has served as adjunct faculty at Shrishti School of Design, Bengaluru. He is deeply interested in Indie thought and its influence on contemporary architecture, urbanism, and placemaking. And last but not the least, we have Professor Riaz Tayyibji, is a practicing architect and partner at Anthill Design. He is passionate about architectural documentation and research and has been an associate professor at CEPT University. As the coordinator of the Gandhi Heritage Sites Mission, he has documented buildings related to Gandhi's life. His practice focuses on the relationship between locality, program, and incremental building to nurture a place. Without further ado, I am pleased to invite Professors Nikant Chaya, Riaz Taibji, and Tridip Surut to take the stage and share their insights on Gandhi's places with us. I would love to invite our guests to take the screen while the team plays a short video narrative.
The Persian poet Hafez said, "Noise is a cruel ruler who is always imposing curfews, while stillness and quiet break open the vintage bottles, awake the real band." If you want the truth, I'll tell you the truth. Listen to the secret sound, the real sound, which is inside you. So says Kabir. Mindful, every day I see or hear something that more or less kills me with delight, that leaves me like a needle in the haystack of light. It is what I was born for, to look, to listen, to lose myself inside this soft world, to instruct myself over and over in joy and acclamation. Nor am I talking about the exceptional, the fearful, the dreadful, the very extravagant, but of the ordinary, the common, the very drab, the daily presentations. O good scholar, I say to myself, how can you help but grow wise with such teachings as this, as the untrimmable light of the world, the oceans shine, the prayers that are made out of grass. By Mary Oliver. And are we here, perhaps, merely to say, house, bridge, fountain, gate, jar, fruit tree, window, at most pillar, tower, but to say them, you understand, to say them in such a way that even the things themselves never hoped to exist so intensely. Rilke, Ninth Duino Elegy. When does quietness come about? We become engrossed, attentive. Our own noise and the noise of opinions and arguments have no space when we attend to what is. Perhaps architecture that calls us to attend, makes us attentive, is the architecture that works on us quietly. Attentive to what? To its location, land, vegetation, creatures, earth, sky, light, shadow. Maybe architecture makes us attentive to these.
Beautiful. Riaz, you have something to show us?
Yes, I'm going to share my screen, and introduce people to the project from which the book emerged. So just give me a moment to share screen. Yes, is my screen visible? Okay, just one moment. Having some. Yes. Yes. So thank you, Ethos, thank you, Geeta, for the introductions. And
Is it a blank white screen?
right now, yes.
Yes, that's the first one. There is a line below. Yeah.
Okay, I will just thank you, Ethos and Geeta, for the introductions, and I will try to do this in a concise manner to introduce the project from which the Gandhi's Places book emerged. This was, as Geeta has already mentioned, the Gandhi Heritage Sites mission, which was a mission set up by the Ministry of Culture, Government of India, in 2013. And it occurred to all three of us that we've been working on this for over a decade since we started. And the first set of exercises was a series of workshops that were set up in order to ensure that the processes of documentation and the quality was established. Notable, conservation architects were invited in order to share their thoughts, ideas, techniques, and we put together a kind of set of guidelines by which the buildings related to the life of Mahatma Gandhi were to be documented. I must tell you that the Gandhi Heritage Sites mission was the mandate was to document the physical heritage associated with the life and work of Mahatma Gandhi. And this not only included his ashrams and the buildings where he lived, but also those where he was incarcerated, or some of his more important ideas emerged, or the important incidences of his life played out. We had 19 project partners, institutions as well as individuals who kind of contributed to the documentation process. The sites were all over the country. 34 were originally identified, of which 27 were found in a condition to be documented. Of those 27 projects, we had 11 which we identified as core, or you could say principal projects, which are important or fundamental to the life of Mr. Gandhi, and the remaining 16 which are important but were not covered in the same detail. And this is reflected in the kind of structure and layout of the book, in which the first section really covers the principal core sites, whereas the second part gives you an overview of the remaining 16 places with one drawing per place. So I'm just sharing with you the number of people and the manner in which we kind of went about it. I will give you a very quick taste of the kind of drawings we made. So this is the ashram at Sevagram, and this would be the site plan. The trees were documented. The species of them, the species of the trees were also documented to really kind of get a sense of the place. Each building was documented in detail, its structure, the materials, of course, the configuration, the way the roofs were made, and in the manner in which architecture drawings are, how would you say, organized, plans, sections, elevations, details were measure drawn by teams that visited the site, stayed there many times, sometimes were lucky enough to live there, and gather this information, both in terms of measurement and technical drawings, as well as photographs. And so this would be the kind of typical documentation sheet that was then submitted to the Gandhi Heritage Sites mission after it had been reviewed by us in Ahmedabad. So these are all the various buildings. I'm not going to go into it in detail. I hope that people will go out and get the book. And also through the course of this conversation, perhaps some more elaborate discussions about this ashram particularly and the one in Ahmedabad will emerge. So this is, of course, the Bapu Kutir, which is Bapu's dwelling in Wardha. And really, it's quite a special building, as is Hriday Kunj, which is in Ahmedabad. And I'm sure that we will look at it in these two particularly in more detail. These are the sections of the same. So very quickly, these are the kind of drawings and photographs. These are photographs of Gandhiji's, massage room, his toilet, the drainage, the relationships between inside and outside, all of which were documented in some detail. And this is just to give those in the audience a flavor of what the documentation process entailed. I'll run through them very quickly. Then this is all what I'm covering right now is all from the Sevagram Ashram, the various buildings that make it up, each of them being studied in detail. There were buildings, and I will come to that quickly. So this is all Sevagram Ashram. And this is the actual sense of the ashram, which we were trying to record through technical drawings. There is some conversation going on that why didn't we use other forms of representation, such as sketches, to be able to get this feel across. I must say that the mission very clearly mandated that the purpose of doing this documentation was to identify, conserve, and preserve for posterity the physical heritage, which means that in case of a calamity, if should these buildings be damaged or be destroyed, the drawings needed to have enough information by which they could be rebuilt. That was the premise of this. So these were not, these were not sensuous drawings that were meant to capture the beauty of these sites. And there are,
but they are sensuous and they do capture.
right. So, in part, perhaps, but what my point is that these are really this was meant to be a technical document.
Yes.
So, for example, even buildings which were not the ashram, this was an institution, Magan Sagralaya in Wardha, which was set up by Gandhiji, where experiments of agriculture, the idea of a museum and what it might be, was simultaneously explored. And these are quite sophisticated buildings, as are the ashrams. But what I mean to say more institutional, we tend to assume that there is only a domesticity to Gandhiji's architecture, and one must recognize that perhaps there are different dimensions to the various buildings that he was associated with. And so, the major part of the GHSM project was the documentation. And the culmination of that process was the book Gandhi's Places, which is what has been recently published and talked about. The book condenses and chooses 130 drawings from the entire the entire set of drawings of each of the sites. So it condenses the entire project into these two representative sections of the core and the other project sites. There are also 3 essays, which each of us wrote, by Professor Chaya and myself. Professor Chaya will, of course, talk about some of the themes that he covered in his essay, but the principal kind of idea of liminality was what he explored and discussed. My own essay talked about the idea of opening up. In 2 ways. It traversed the life of Gandhi and the various types of buildings and physical spaces, including urban spaces that he inhabited, and the kind of manner of his inhabitation which might open up some conversations, given our present time, to how we might design and build and inhabit spaces today. Tidip Bhai talked about what it means to consider a house for a man who was in principle homeless, and what these ideas and what the idea of home might be for a mendicant. These are he explored the intangible dimensions of this architecture in many ways. And that with that, I'll leave this introduction, and Professor Chaya can take over from here. Thank you.
Riaz, you are not going to talk about your essay?
So I will talk about it after you, I thought.
All right.
But,
Okay.
you were going.
As you wish.
Yes.
As you wish. Yes, so my essay is about what I call the architecture of liminality. Now, that's a difficult word, so I'll just go into it a little bit. Liminality is the state of in-between, neither inside nor outside, neither belonging to this culture or that culture, neither belonging to someone nor belonging to everyone. Liminality is the state that is adopted by those who are somewhere trying to say something else about their society or how society should be. So it is a movement away from and a movement into something or movement out of something. It's not a static state. And so what I want to say is that Gandhi's architecture is not something which is final and complete in the sense that normally we have architecture, but is always in the process of coming into existence, being used and being maybe given up. So this kind of, and this Victor Turner had said that the prophets and artists tend to be liminal or marginal people, edgemen who strive with passionate sincerity to rid themselves of the cliches associated with status incumbency and role playing. Nobody could do this better than Gandhi. He could be, he in fact rid himself every day of the cliches of the world in which he was situated. So I talk normally, I mean, in the essay, I talk about the ashram at Sabarmati. So the first thing about the ashram at Sabarmati is that it is in the city, but not of the city. It's an in-between place. What do I mean by that? Well, when Gandhi took up that land, it was unimproved land along the river edge. To the north of it was the Sabarmati jail, and to the south of it was a crematorium. And Gandhi wrote at that time that this is the right place for our activities to carry on the search for truth and develop fearlessness. For on one side are the iron bolts of the foreigners, that's in the prison, and on the other, the thunderbolts of Mother Nature. So for some strange reason, Gandhi chooses this middle space between these two very unpleasant, to the normal human being, unpleasant locations. But it also is a way of looking at the city differently, because it is on the western side of the river. On the eastern side is the old city, then the mills that had developed all around it, and the Shahi Bagh, which was the place where all the rich people stayed, and the cantonment where the Britishers stayed. And it showed look, you have this society, you have this city, which is in 4 different ways somehow not quite right. The old city and the old society has problems of social differentiation. The mills, today we talk about all the sustainability aspects, and it's already visible at that time that they were a problem. Smoke, use of all kinds of coal, etc., etc. Then the rich people's houses in Shahibag, again, the differences in society are being reflected right there. And then the colonials who come from outside and are taking over and imposing a kind of worldview on a society. These are the things that from the ashram, you can look at the other side and you see these things. But also, the ashram is visible to those who are living in the old city or in Shahibag, and they see an alternative way of living. And I think the ashram is not a place of going away from the world. The ashram is a place which is a challenge to the world, and this is very carefully made in the manner in which it is made, because it's not built of things which are rural. It doesn't try to look non-technical. It is already the same as the rest of the city in terms of construction. However, it shows that you can relate in a totally different way to economy, to politics, to social organization, and so on and so forth. And it's a challenge to the old city. So this is one thing about it. The ashram is also a place in which the spatial and temporal rhythms of the individual and the collective are reorganized. First of all, you have to notice, if you go to the Sabarmati ashram, there is no center, there is no main place. This is the center of the ashram. Where will you say it? There's no such thing. Now, this is something which is rare. In almost every such place, you would find that there would be one place which would be given preeminent importance. Here, no. It's a grid. It's a kind of grid, but loosely implemented. The ashram, it doesn't use an abstract and homogeneous grid, but it is a grid all the same, which organizes the pace of life. At the same time, the time is also organized. You have to get up at a certain time, have breakfast, and so on and so forth. And so there is a discipline. However, there are periods in between where you do what you want to do, where you explore the world for yourself. And this kind of a idea of a grid and a freedom from the grid, a time schedule and a freedom from the time schedule, this is there in the ashram. The third thing is that everybody thinks that Gandhiji was not interested in materials. If anything, there couldn't be anybody more interested in materials than Gandhi. And he was interested in all kinds of materials. Finally, the most important material is the body. And the body takes in food and excretes. And Gandhi was interested both in the input and the output, because he felt that the flow of material through every kind of phenomenon of existence is something that is at the base of our interest in the world. And we can live in the world properly only when we see every single flow as a flow and not as a finished product. This is important. So he makes buildings at the ashram, which continually need upkeep. You've got to keep the wood free of termites. You got to varnish it. You got to clean. You got to change the bamboo. This kind of idea of material that breathes and needs periodic maintenance makes you attend to the architecture. That means that the architecture here no longer becomes remote and what they nowadays call maintenance free. It is not something which is away from you, something which you control, but you are all the time in conversation with it. And it is never finished, but it is always calling for a relationship to be established. All this comes from the sense that one is there, one doesn't possess the world, but one enjoys the world. This is something really important in Gandhi's philosophy, that you may enjoy sunlight, you may enjoy the breeze, you may enjoy greenery and trees, you may enjoy water, you may enjoy so many things, but you don't try to possess them and you don't try to control them. And this happens to work on our body, on our buildings, on everything that we do. And therefore, the ashram is a way of showing that you don't try to stop time, because whatever we have got is a gift from the existing world, and it's not a resource to be used or stored and so on and so forth. Everything that we have is a gift. This is something which is, if you don't consider it a gift, then you have to consider it something that you take from the world. That means it's a kind of stealing. And this was not acceptable. Therefore, what happens with the architecture is that you make an architecture that receives the world rather than makes the world. The architecture does not become special in any way, does not try to enclose something, always tries to say, I am part of this place because this place existed before I came, before I made a house, and so on and so forth. This is something very interesting. How are we going to make an architecture that receives the world rather than controls it? And you inhabit the world rather than controlling the world. This is the message of Gandhi's architecture. If you look at the ashram, this you will see is all there. But that doesn't mean a kind of woolly-headedness about making. Gandhi was, after all, a shoemaker, a carpenter, a weaver, a spinner. He could do all these things and with skill. So he's not trying to make a wishy-washy kind of ashram. He wants to see there is a certain clarity of making, and that clarity still allows the world and its changing status to all the time affect it. So there is the suspension of polarities. If you look at Gandhi's house, which is the front? Is it the front of the courtyard which faces as you enter, or is it towards the river? If it's towards the river, then why has he made the front towards the back? And if not, then why is the front, which is the courtyard, looking like a domestic space? So you suspend all these things, and you say, look, life consists of both. Making how the house works, cooking, cleaning, washing clothes, and so on is part of life. Doing work is also part of life. I can look at the river while it's going on. And so this, in detail, if you look at how that house is made, you will realize that it is one of the most ingenious works of architecture that we have at hand. And this applies not only to the house, but to the whole ashram. Finally, there is a sense in which Gandhi's architecture is not trying to say anything. Architecture, Gandhi's architecture is only being there, is being inhabited. It is not giving a message. There is no propaganda, and there is nothing to be propagated, no message. There is no representation, only existence. Now, this architecture students, all of us, we need to look at this, because all the time, instead of living it, we try to make something, say something about life. And I think this is a message in Gandhi's work. How does that come about? There is a generosity and an inclusion of everything. There is a refusal to choose this or that. And therefore, architecture here becomes the silent vessel of being alive on earth, fully awake to the wonders and its vicissitudes, a fit place for one who wishes to experiment with truth. And maybe all architecture, or at least a large section of architecture, should be one which helps you to experiment with truth. Thank you. I hope I did not take too long.
No, not at all. Thank you so much, Professor Chaya. Would Professor Trideep or Professor Riaz like to share something more?
Riaz, always Riaz.
Right. Yeah, Professor Chai, your point reminded me of, I think, an essay we shared around at the time that we were doing the documentation by Gopal Krishna Gandhi, who
Yes.
mentioned or talked about the difference in the way that, the Attenborough film represents the famous incident of Gandhi being, taken off the train in South Africa.
Yeah.
And Gandhi's own kind of telling of that incident in his autobiography, and the matter of factness that he was asked to get off the train. There was no kind of mythical moment or propaganda
Yes.
made of that moment, not making the moment larger than it is. And I thought that that's something very important given where we are.
Yeah.
In creating propagandas and then giving them material.
Yeah.
In ways. But to talk a little bit about the essay that I contributed to the book, which is titled simply Gandhi's Built Environment. It kind of maps the physical spaces that Gandhi inhabited from his youth in where he was born in Porbandar. There was a small house at the center of Porbandar, which is a very well-known trading town, a sea trading town, which was in some sense what one could call cosmopolitan, in the sense that it had many communities living together. And Gandhiji grew up in this, he actually grew up pretty much at the center of that four-square town. His mother was a very interesting lady who followed a philosophy that had mixed influences from many, many cultures. And he imbibed a great amount of this kind, what we would call heterogeneous ways of thinking in his childhood. The house itself was very similar to the kind of houses that you get in the region. Was tight, parallel walls. There was a courtyard. There were closed rooms, which locally we call ordos. It's basically a closed room. And those rooms are spaces which are normally not lived in. They are used for storage and maybe elderly people, people who are unwell, married couples who need privacy. Only they use that space. But life in Saurashtra and the area where he grew up really happens in a kind of veranda-like space that's called an osri. It has many forms. It could be a parsal, which is an inward-looking veranda onto the courtyard. And that's really where the life of the family unfolds. And Gandhi was born into this house, and he was born in one of the dark rooms in that house. And this is very well recorded by his biographers and himself through and by himself. And in Porbandar, as he grew older, he started going to school. And you can imagine that in this small town, his whole life took place in a 2.5, maybe 3 kilometer radius. He would go walking to school in those days. We are talking about the 1880s, 1890s. And it was, in fact, a dusty path. It's a dry, arid landscape. And you're walking the streets, which are full of dust. And the school is, in fact, called Dhulia Shala, which is, like a school of dust. And he will play with being the center of town, there's a temple nearby, and the children of the Gandhi family will be playing in that temple precinct. Now, this is a very common kind of way of life, even if you go to that region now. It's not something that was special. It was of that time and place, and he imbibed it as a very important space in which many of his thoughts would later go back when he would recollect. And this would also happen. His family moved to Rajkot, where they lived in a slightly more generous house. And this house type is called a Delo type, which is, it is a flatter, more generous, one might say agricultural type of house. Many times the courtyard is inhabited by animals and by agricultural processes, threshing and so on and so forth, cleaning, etc., etc. I don't think that his would have been used that manner. Both his father and his grandfather were ministerial people who would write and played important literary roles, not literary, but ministerial roles, and therefore would not have had this, but the house type certainly did. And in this, the kitchen of his house would have actually be part of the open veranda space. So his mother would have perhaps been, in that liminal space that Professor Chaya was talking about, not inside, not outside, not even fully in the veranda, because the kitchen would have been enclosed with another layer. So, kind of making this not an osri, but an osri, all these kind of things where the spaces are lived in and neat definitions do not apply. You cannot put a word to it. Even if anyone calls it a kitchen, it's a kind of loose approximation because you can imagine kids running in and out and so on and so forth. Today, you would have to call it a kitchen plus a creche if you wanted to be precise, etc. It doesn't work in that traditional modality. Gandhi would have grown up in all of this, and the liminality that Professor Chaya was talking about and is talking about in his essay is not something that is emerging from a vacuum. It is just that he is taking it very seriously. The ideas that he were inculcated through his childhood, he's taking very seriously. And in some sense, it is those ideas that he finds very useful in thinking about new ideas of modern ideas that are emerging at the time, and perhaps considering them in ways that does justice both to himself and his background, as well as the opportunities that these new ideas allow for. So when Gandhiji moves to London to study law, he starts having to live in a British house, in a London house, which is a 3-story building. And one wonders how he kind of would have managed that. And when one reads the archival material, one is surprised that he actually enjoyed it. For the first time, he's introduced to the idea of privacy and that he has a room of his own. Now, you imagine the house I was talking about in Porbandar or in Rajkot, where, because of the in-betweenness, things flow here and there. And privacy, there has to be a different kind of notion of that. And he has that. But when he goes to London, this idea of being able to seclude oneself actually excites him for a while. And the reason is that he is able to kind of listen to himself, is my way of thinking about it, that as a young man, the inner voice he starts being able to focus on it more. You can also imagine that in a liminal space, to be able to find that concentration at that age might not be so easy. One might say one might get easily distracted, but in London he finds this privacy, which is important. Interestingly, at the same time, and I don't know if one might want to call it to balance it out intuitively, uh, in Porbandar and Rajkot, what he thought or was beginning to think that the city is a place of temptation, of sin. He has a very naughty friend who tries to get him smoking and eating meat and all of this in Rajkot. So he thinks that everything outside is a little bit tempting, and that one constantly has to fight it, distraction, and that the city is full of this. But by the time he gets to London, though it is a far more tempting city, I imagine, he is able to traverse the city on his own terms. Realizes that in certain parts of the city, there are people who you kind of are able to respond to or find. And he finds these very strange, marginal thinkers, very important people on the outskirts, the edges of London, not in the center of town where he's going to study law at the Inns of Court, but places where he's living, places where you find vegetarian restaurants in London at that time. And he is conversing with these people and finding a great resonance. And he's finding also other thinkers like Rousseau and philosophers of that type who he resonates with much more. He is introduced to Leo Tolstoy. He's introduced to people thinking about how one should deal with smoke in the city of London and pollution. These are 100 years before perhaps we are thinking about it here in any kind of systematic manner. But he's also he's actually forced to write and speak. And this is really where he starts becoming an author and in some sense, not an orator, but somebody who is able to convince people. We must also remember that he's learning the law. And in London, this ability to use the city is something that he discovers by walking. And we know from the Dandi March and other such incidences that walking is very important to Mr. Gandhi. But he first realizes its importance for economic reasons, that it saves you money. He also writes, he actually writes a book for students coming to study in London and advising them on how they might be or live there economically, frugally. And walking is an important part of this, where he says that not only will it keep you fit, it'll keep you warm and it will save you money. Okay, so that walking allows him to understand and engage with London in a way that he would not have perhaps opened up to had he continued living in a small 2.5-kilometer area in Saurashtra. Now, this is hypothetical, but one gets a sense of this because when he moves to South Africa, this movement across what starts off as this moving in the city actually traverses landscapes. So if you actually do a kind of timeline of his years in South Africa, he's moving from Johannesburg, he's moving to its suburbs. Firstly, he's really a crazy kind of guy, in the sense that when he goes to South Africa, he does not go and live in the suburbs where the Indians and the Asians and the brown folk live. He goes to the most posh area and lives as a neighbor of the most elite white community, the people who are actually going to become governors and chief justices and the like. He is not somebody who has any fear of simply entrenching himself. His office is in the heart of the downtown area. He associates himself with the fanciest restaurants, even if he's made to wait in the lobby and not eat in the restaurant, which all that apartheid stuff is happening. But he seems to be pushing boundaries all the time. He gets into business deals with people to start a cafe. He's doing stuff with the Chinese on their, looking at their clubs. And this man is walking across these cities like Durban and Johannesburg, camping with his great friend who is an architect by the name of Herman Kallenbach. And they will stay for many months in canvas tents on the outskirts in the middle of nowhere. And this kind of traversing of city, suburb, walking along rivers, walking along hills, camping, staying in what you could call traditional house types that belong to the Zulus. All of this kind of influence is shaping Mr. Gandhi's way of inhabiting the world. And at a point, we know that he decides to start an ashram, his first ashram, which is Phoenix Farms. And this is 1,000-acre of farmland, which is donated to him by his architect friend, who is extremely successful. And Mr. Kallenbach is this strapping 6-foot plus Lithuanian German who studied in the Stuttgart Academy and has learnt, the proper disciplines of carpentry and woodwork and that come from that tradition. And he teaches Mr. Gandhi, and together they also go to the Trappist monasteries outside the city, and they see the relationship between labor, work, and a kind of spiritual search that the monks used to follow. And Mr. Gandhi is extremely impressed by this relationship that he recognizes immediately, that material, labor, that is the use of the body, and discipline cannot be dissociated. You cannot separate them if you want to search for something that is spiritual or even inward, that these three need to have a kind of very, how would you say, specific relationship. And with Herman Kallenbach, they decide that on this 1,000-acre piece of land, that they will set up the first experiment of these three dimensions in search of kind of spiritual inner assist for a spiritual search. And this is initially set up by simply scrapping together donated material, tin sheets, the most rural, rudimentary kind of jugaad kind of construction is put up in order to keep that running. The other thing that Mr. Gandhi learns from the monks in the monastery is that they have a printing press, and he starts a printing press, and it's from then on that he will edit and write in 4 newspapers, which are that he keeps running for almost 40 years out of there. So here, I just want to, before I kind of bring it to the ashrams in India very quickly, I just wanted to kind of give you a sense of the way that Mr. Gandhi's 2.5-kilometer radius experience in a small town in Saurashtra has completely has kind of expanded, where he has learned to kind of inhabit this kind of much larger geography. And he starts thinking in those matters. So whether he's taking a march from Natal to Johannesburg, or it might be the other way around, he realizes that there are political dimensions to inhabiting the space and place at that scale. And of course, this will have great importance to the way that he organizes things when he gets back to India. Interestingly, when he comes back to India, in all these times when he's with his friends and co-experimenters at both Phoenix Settlement and Tolstoy Farm, Gandhi is always wanting to build in mud. Okay, he's trying to convince people that let's build in mud. And partly, I think it comes from the memories of the houses of his youth in Saurashtra and in Kutch and that region. And nobody allows him. His closest friends absolutely kind of dismiss the idea as impractical. He tries to convince them that they have Zulu references, and that's also thrown out. So one would expect that when you come to Ahmedabad, your own areas, not literally, but close to your own area, that you would be able to convince people that, we'll do it in our material, the material of my choice. But he doesn't impose that either. He decides, as Professor Chaya was saying, he builds in the manner that is recognizable there, familiar in Ahmedabad at the time. And that allows everybody to build with him. Okay, so this is the other question that many people ask after this book: was Gandhi an architect? Do you consider Gandhi an architect? I don't think that it's the correct question. He was building with people, and this idea of authorship, which even in his autobiography he problematizes, because he's writing over such a large period of time. In Hind Swaraj, he says that this writing is only mine if I am able to act by it, not just because I've written it. And this also ties up with what Professor Chaya was saying. So he's saying, unless I can act in accordance with what I write, that authorship is meaningless. And that's in some sense also how he's thinking about building, that, if I'm an architect, it's meaningless unless the architecture is able to hold life in the manner in which one is hoping to live. And that demonstrates it. And so if one is looking at a collective way of experimenting, and the ashram being that, then at Sabarmati ashram, the idea of him deciding the material would be counter to that exercise. And he chooses materials where everybody can contribute and everybody knows how to. By making something special or different or from another place, it would just limit the number of people who can do it or can do. And therefore, he actually asks, when he's building the school, he invites teachers to donate their labor to build the school. And in that way, the entire ashram is a collaborative process. That it emerges out of a collaborative process. So this is the kind of thinking that develops, and that he takes even in his last ashram at Wardha. He takes there. And I'd only like to end with the fact that this opening up that is taking place, because he's actually traversing and moving, is also happening at the scale of the building and the house, in the way that these are organized. If you take the houses of his youth with his closed rooms and the ordos and the osris, when you move to Hriday Kunj at the Sabarmati ashram, you see that what would traditionally have been the closed rooms would have been put in one line along a veranda, and now are put perpendicular to it, opening up the central space and then creating that very ambiguous space that Professor Chaya was talking about, as to which side is the front or the back of that building. But the whole relationship comes from the closed and open and semi-open spaces, the veranda and the rooms. If I look at then what he does in Wardha, that completely, the idea of the room itself kind of dissipates. And it becomes a kind of, how would you say, a kind of texture which is inhabited, and that is shaped by the behavior of the people who live in it. And that includes all in Mirabai, Madeline Slade, who actually made that house for him and then adjusted it. Actually, she made it for herself and then adjusted it to his needs.
Professor Riaz,
Yes,
this
I am going to.
Yes.
No, I'm at an end. I'm at the end, so I will just close it here. So my point is that there's a kind of opening up of the plan of the organization of the house, where it does not come from technology. It doesn't come by using steel and glass. It comes from actually reorganizing the material of the building in order that it is open from inside out and not the other way around. Thank you. I'm sorry for taking very long on this.
Shows the love and the passion. Great. Srideep, would you like to talk about the essay that
Just no, very, very briefly, but I had a thought, and when our traveling circus gathers momentum, the two of you should speak about Gandhi and me about architecture, and that may, it'll be nice to do that. But very briefly, only 2 points. One, does the man need a house? and this particular man need a house? And his answer would be no, I don't need a house. Let me ask the question differently. Do you need the ashram? Which is a very different question from asking whether you need a house. And his answer would be absolutely essential. I can't think of a life without the ashram, which meant not the buildings, not just only the people, but the ashram community coming together as co-experimenters, living through a certain set of rules, observances. So as Gandhi grows older, wiser, more reflective, he begins to really not think of the house, although he builds them with a lot of care. Both Riaz and Chaya spoke about it with a lot of thought. His need for the home is increasingly less and less. He is becoming both a mendicant, he is becoming largely peripatetic, and therefore the idea of a house becomes a problematic thing. Does that mean that he is not a householder? He is a householder. He holds on to the idea of the family with great affection. He is an obsessive writer of letters to the daughters-in-law, to the sons, to the grandchildren at some point. He writes a letter every week to each one. Each part of the family receives a letter every week. So there is the householding that happens, and it is sometimes fiercely held together. The idea of the community becomes important, but the house itself begins to lose significance. At some point, and as that progression happens, it's important to understand that the idea of the ashram also changes. Ashram is no longer Sabarmati, it no longer is Vardha. Gandhi says the ashram is where the ashram observances are. So while one is in prison, be it in Yeravda, be it in Aga Khan, or one is in train, traveling through the Grand Trunk Road, but traversing it through a train, the ashram is with you in that train compartment so long as the observances are there. So what you see Gandhi do here is constantly peel off the need to not own, not possess, but the idea that you needed institutional structures or you needed built structures to lead a life of norms, a normative life, an ethical life, a life of virtue, is something that gets increasingly on the margins. Till a point where he would say, I don't need the ashram, I don't need the associates, I don't even need observances. I will begin to create my own set of observances, which are only for me and not for the ashram community. So if one were to look at the last year and a half of his life, the man begins to challenge the very idea while he is walking barefoot through Noakhali, then Bihar, then Calcutta, and Delhi, awaiting the bullets of the assassin. All through that period, he is looking at a situation where he begins to even rethink the notions of the ashramic observances. So, as we take the journey from South Africa, or as Riaz did, from Porbandar to Rajkot to England to South Africa to homes in India, that there is also a journey where the need for any of these structures, which are external to him and which require a validation from anybody else, is reduced. Finally, he becomes, in a very arrogant, spiritually arrogant way, saying, I am the only reference. And that's where I stop. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that was quite a quite a session, from the meticulous process that was followed for the documentation to directing the narrative from Gandhi's lives to his places. We saw how Gandhi's vision for society transcended into his places, into the built form that he manifested in. The explorations of liminality by Professor Chaya to the stories of a young Mohandas by Riaz, we learned how architecture is to act by how one thinks and how one hopes to live. This is such a profound dimension, really. And the questions just now by Trideep make you understand the man, or maybe not, maybe just make you wonder about the man and his notions of the built environment and, of course, of life. It starts getting you to understand that part a little better. Thank you for your insights. And like I was chatting with the team on the side, saying it really felt stifled in these 1.5 hours, and we could go on and on. Unfortunately, there is a time constraint that we have to bear with. I have a few questions that I've put out, and I'll start with Professor Chaya.
Geeta, what neither of them told you is that we had great fun doing this.
I can see that.
The reason why it took 10 years because we were having a ball. And that's what people need to know. This was not serious, right? It was not, it was none of this. We were actually having lots of tea, great coffee, lots of adda, and that's why it took 10 years. And that's why we're continuing with it.
Yeah.
I can quite imagine. I've been chatting with you on the side as well when we met last week, and the three of you were talking about having that adda here as well. So yes, it has been fun, and I'm sure the teams that worked with you, the people who went to those sites and they would have grown, not just had fun, but I'm sure they would have grown as well. Professor Chaya, we met in Delhi soon after I concluded my walk from Kolkata to Delhi.
Yes.
And I remember you encouraging me to take on this walking studio. And I don't know if you know, but we did just that with the Odisha Walking Studio, and some of the colleges that went with me are present today. As I read these essays and having followed Gandhi's life on and off through his biography and other books, I mean, today also you talked about it. I think Riaz talked about walking playing a large role in his life, in determining his routine, how reaching a place on foot gave him time for explorations, ruminations, and connections, how they shaped his understanding. I would like you to reflect a little bit on the importance of such connections through a very innocent act, casual act as walking. I mean, there are a lot of youngsters here today, and I think it'll be nice for you to speak to them about,
Well, actually, Geeta, you understand the whole idea of walking much better than many of us. But still, walking is a passion with Gandhi, is a passion with many of us. Why is it so? One thing that happens with walking is that everything slows down. Everything becomes scaled to your own sense of time, your body's sense of time, your heartbeat, your breathing. Everything is at play, and thinking, which is kind of a younger brother of breathing. I think thinking changes when you walk. And I would say that any person who doesn't walk misses out some of the profound observations and also some of the profound realizations that walking gives you. I'm sure you are well aware of that, having walked so much. So that's where I would keep it.
Thank you. I just a question to any of you who'd like to take this. These essays constantly travel between, and today's conversation as well, travels between the self, the community, the built form, nature, just as Gandhi's experiments did. I've read my experiments with truth at different points in life, and I'm now listening to an audio narration of it when I walk in the mornings. Very early in life, Gandhi speaks of the power of simplicity and for how it's all pervasive in his choices and solutions in living. And I see fantastic expressions of drawings in your books as well, which are a clear enunciation of that simplicity. Do you think these expressions of design and building as simple responses were deliberate efforts? I also wonder about how complex this whole expression of simplicity can be. If it was indeed simple, then you'd see a lot more of it. Some reflections on that would be lovely to hear.
They were completely.
Before they answer the architectural part, just let me problematize this a little bit.
Right.
He was simple in everything except when it came to books. Okay, the library in Ahmedabad, which the first municipal library of Ahmedabad started with a donation from him of 10,000 books.
Okay.
That was part of the library that he had. Right? So when we speak of lack of possession and simplicity, it was about everything else but not books. So let's put that in perspective. But the two of you.
Yep. Yeah, Riaz, you were saying something.
No. So I was saying that it was very deliberate. But again, we've looked at only the ashrams. We haven't even looked at the schools in any great detail in the essays that we are talking about, or let's say some of the other institutional buildings, which are actually very complex. They are very sophisticated in the way that they are articulated and that he's associated with. So, I think in his personal life, there is a huge emphasis on that. But where it engages, the buildings that engage with the world in a broader way, that I think needs a little bit more thought as to how does one think about those buildings, because some of them are the one that I briefly showed in Varda has become a kind of personal favorite only because there's that little kuti that Kumarappa's inhabiting, and he's thinking about economy and agriculture. And the first design competition charkhas are being exhibited in this. It's a building that is for the Spinning Association. But the other thing is we talk about simplicity, but Mr. Gandhi is the organizer of the first design competition, international design competition in India, which was 1919 and then 1929. It will surprise people that the prize money in 1929 was 1,00,000 rupees if you won.
Boy.
You had to submit a 1:1 working model of that charkha, and it was meant to be a portable charkha, which means Mr. Gandhi already understood the relationship between work and movement, that you would work while you moved as a part of being a modern individual, so to say. That individual had to be spiritually inclined inwards and not in the way that the Enlightenment set it up is another question. But the fact that work and movement were intrinsic in the modern world was something that he recognized. That's a complex set of relationships. So when Tadib talks about the train, actually there are things that he not invented, but he was thinking about of how he could work on the train or how he would work after the train, etc., etc. So I think that these are, in order to kind of fully implement that simplicity, there are complex things
Right.
that
I think we have to look
of things.
We have to look at something that Einstein said. Everything should be as simple as possible, but not simpler. And I think that applies to Gandhi's way of working. Simple in the sense that it has no complications, nothing extra, and no wastage. Wastage was something which is very, very wrong. And this is something which I think, in a sense, it is a Gujarati quality of using things in such a way that you don't waste. This is actually an Indian quality, but in Gujarat, it is there throughout society. In some other parts of India, some parts of society waste a lot, whereas in Gujarat, more or less. So anyway, this thing of not wasting anything and of using every little thing, like when I was a child, we used to have a story about Gandhiji picking up the stub of a pencil, which was not to be wasted, and so on. So I think that simplicity is much more intricate than thinking in terms of chalega. There is no chalega in that.
There's no compromise. It's
Yes.
something that, yeah, you
No,
just believe in.
Tridibhai and Professor Chaya would often discuss that when it came to writing, and he did a lot of it, he used a Mobla pen. So there was no, he used a Zenith watch. These are absolutely the epitome of each of these artifacts. So he does, and if he's doing carpentry or he's spinning, I can imagine that he would be really upset with bad workmanship. I mean, it's something that's
Quality, yeah.
Yes, because also you have to look at it in terms of the absolute waste of resource if you do it badly. One has to understand that something done badly is not a reflection only on your skill, but it's the absolute, you can't, that resource is completely gone down the drain. And I think in that respect, one must look at his aesthetics, if you like.
I'm now going to hand it over to Arya and Manvita, who have their questions. There are questions coming in the chat box, and I'm sure there'll be people from the audience who'd like to ask. So Arya and Manvita, over to you. Can't hear you, Arya. You have to unmute it.
Sorry. Thank you to all our speakers for their insightful session. As a second-year student, I'm often wondering about history. Why do we study it? Gandhi's places, although not in our Bannister literature, is a part of our history. So my question is, what was the idea as well as the need for documenting Gandhi's places? How do you think we students can take forward these lessons? This question is for Professor Trideep.
The impulse was very simple. At some point, something which is far more important to me, and I think for all of us, were the books, and at what's called the collected works of Gandhi, which run into 100 volumes. And at some point, the government of India had decided to re-edit them, and there were problems with it, and it was faulty, simply put. So we started a process by which saying, can these things be put together? And that's why the Gandhi Heritage Mission came together of the government of India, in which the Gandhi Heritage sites became a part thereof. At that point, I was at the Sabarmati Ashram, and we proposed to the government, say that it could happen that in the process of change, many of these sites might be lost to us, or they could face other forms of existential problems, like a bulldozer. What do? We don't have documentation. And that's when we started, Chaya and I and Riaz started on documenting the Sabarmati Ashram first as a demonstration that this is how it needs to be done. Once that happened, it was scaled up for the entire country. And we couldn't really go outside of the country. We should have been able to do that more detailed work both in South Africa and in Bangladesh, but which we could not. So that's what it is. Do we need to preserve all of these? I have, as I say in my essay, he wouldn't care. You could have a multi-storied building at Radai Kunj, and I would buy the penthouse. Great views. I don't think he's attached to those build forms, those spaces. He is not. Are we attached? I think we are. As societies and peoples, we need tangible reminders of what possibilities existed. And do people come there? About 3,000 visitors a day to the Sabarmati Ashram. Um, that was our experience. 10 years. I mean, it's been 7 years since I left the place, but it is something that draws people. Spaces are important for that reason. They are not important because Gandhi wanted us to preserve them. I don't think we should lay that as at his door. It's our need, and if it's our need, can we do that better? That's really what the impulse was.
Thank you, sir.
To answer, to respond to the first part of your question, where you invoked Mr. Bannister Fletcher, Sir Bannister Fletcher, and the tome that has become his book. If I was to look at the early editions of Bannister Fletcher, he would have called Gandhi's architecture grotesque. And he would have called it an inferior architecture. He would call it a lesser architecture. And these categorizations came out of a certain context, a certain context of superiority, of looking at cultures that were away from a certain tree of architecture, which you see on the second page of Bannister Fletcher. The further you are from the trunk of the tree, the less of the architecture. And I think that is partly the conversation that Mr. Gandhi himself was interested in having. Can civilizations have a dialogue about the value of things without presuming a superiority or an inferiority? And I think it's worth, you ask why is it important for students? I think only to assess the architecture on its own terms, to visit it. Definitely, I would say to visit it, and maybe the drawings are, from a student perspective, meant to guide you, like we use drawings anywhere else, as a kind of reference, as a kind of document to give us an insight into certain aspects of the building that one has while one is seeing the building or experiencing the building. But I think the question is how it dialogues with all the other buildings in that book that you referred to. And I would say that as a student, we are always doing that. As students, we are always doing that, to have an experience and kind of weigh it against and look at it more closely with other experiences, both architectural and, as Mr. Gandhi keeps pointing, to life. And I would look at it in that manner. That's the documentation, apart from its ultimate purpose, which is in the hopefully never event of catastrophe. I'm saying that as a document for an architectural student, I would say it's meant to be a guide.
Thank you, sir.
So next, I have a question. So this partly answers my next question to you, Professor Riaz. Like, how do you think Gandhi's vision could be applied to urban planning and architecture in modern India?
Don't.
I don't. It's a good idea. No. I think that it's not the. The thing is, I think this is precisely what Mr. Gandhi would point, that you can't take something which is about dealing with yourself and then say that I have to deal with a city. He was teaching us how to deal with ourselves and some practices and approaches and attitudes and ideas about how to deal with ourselves.
No, but I think there's something else here. I'm sorry, I can't avoid.
No.
The fact is that planning, urban planning, city planning, starts from how you look at what is good and what is not good. If you think that rushing around is good, then the fastest transportation systems are excellent. If you think that moving about less is better, then the 15-minute city might be the better city. And I think we have to look at Gandhi's work as examples which talk about a different notion of how we could live together. many different kinds of people, different religions, different kind of food, everything all existing harmoniously or at least without violence. I think that is something that city planning could very much learn from. And I think much of what is happening today is extractive and violent in planning. And I think it will be good if planning stops for a moment and starts looking at the world in a less extractive manner and takes things like climate change more seriously. Yeah.
And can I just add one other dimension? Is that for Gandhi, city is a political space.
Yes.
That's where he does his politics from. Now, can you actually design a city where politics is possible? Now we know that, for example, we fear the people coming into our cities for political purposes. We put up barricades. In a place like Ahmedabad, there is no designated space where you could go and say, I do wish to have my point of view heard, or I am grieving. I'm not grieving personally, I'm grieving societally. Where can I go? So, one of the things that Gandhi would say, well, a city that doesn't really allow for politics of the people um, is not really a democratic imagination. And what we need, if you're thinking Gandhi or even thinking democracy, forget Gandhi because democracy is far larger. If you're thinking democracy, we need cities that allow for politics. So I mean, there are large questions that your query throws up, and we need to think about them.
Thank you, sir.
Actually, just to add, Tridip gave convocation address in Accept many years ago. And I was reading that essay again, and it's about public space. And I think sitting in Gandhi Ashram, he was thinking about public space, and it's something that ought to be more widely known, that essay. It would really add to this conversation.
We'd love to, if you would like to share that essay, if you have a link to it or the text content to it, we add it to this course itself. Sonam, that can be done, right? We could happily add it to this course content.
Okay, I will send it to you.
Perfect. Thank you.
And I'm the only convocation speaker in history who, after giving a lecture, said, I know how to give a lecture, please give me a job. And I got a job.
No, several years later, not right then.
We're just making light of things, yeah.
Okay, so my next question is to Professor Chaya. Sir, can you help us students to initiate, is Gandhi's philosophy only for the villages and 15-minute city and the other examples you mentioned now? I'm deeply moved by what I learned today. How can I apply it in my design process? How should I start? How should I take my design forward? Can you guide and suggest an approach for design problem in our studio?
I think that should be fairly simple. So the first thing is that whatever we make should be as simple as possible, but not simpler. Yeah. And I think that is very important. The second thing is that it's not for show, but it's for inhabitation. Whatever we make is to be inhabited, and it will change over time. It is not something which is a product, which is shown that this, like on an Instagram feed, it's something which goes on and something happens to it and something more happens to it and so on. Just like I no longer look like I used to look at the beginning of my teaching career. I suppose one could say that a teacher should be disposed of if doesn't fit the same. So you should start doing things like that. So it means that you make an architecture which is capable of taking in things rather than imposing itself. If you take these three things, one, simplicity. The second, it's not for show. And the third, it is something which will absorb rather than impose. Then you got a Gandhian architecture on the horizon.
Thank you, sir.
So, as students, we are expected to document and understand the existing built environment and our history. And we face many challenges while doing so. So, we wanted to know what were the most challenging aspects of researching and documenting Gandhi spaces for three professors. So, can all three of you tell us about your collective journey and the challenges and how we can learn from your experience?
The most challenging thing for me was that the buildings disappear, and two, I can't draw. I make chai, right? And so I was in charge of the disappearing buildings. The other things were done by these two.
Yes. I think the disappearing buildings are something which is a problem. And out of the sites that were identified originally, you must have seen in that table that Riyaz showed that so many were not available anymore. They weren't there. The other thing is that people add to without thought. So they sometimes change the texture of how you could use something or how it could be inhabited. And that is a problem that we found in a few places. The third problem, and that is very unfortunate. Very few architects actually know how to document and draw. This we found out through the process. That's why also it took 10 years. That it the whole question of documenting faithfully requires a very, very clear, methodical approach to the process of documentation. And this does not exist in most places. So they try to sort of do it fast or to do it more impressive, take a lot of photographs, but get the scales wrong, or the buildings, when they put the AutoCAD or the PDFs onto the site, they stretch them, they compress them, and so you lose the actual character of the building. So I think these are the problems that I found quite challenging.
Yes, I think Professor Chaya has outlined one of them, which was just getting parity of drawing quality across all the participants, contributors, which was more difficult than I expected. Because I mean, at the end of the day, the buildings in front of you, you have to take a measure tape and record it. But yeah, it was a challenge. I think the other question, which in some sense, as we've been saying, led to a lot of fun, was the fact that a lot of these buildings are made in materials that become difficult to document very precisely. I mean, if you're taking, let's say, the Vardha Ashram and you're taking Bapu Kutir, it's made in mud, and 3 years ago it would have been probably 20 mm less than what it is today because Lippan is being done, the cow dung is being put, etc., etc. So what should we take as the original truth of the documentation? And we looked at it in a very practical manner in the end, in the sense that on the date that we measure draw is the truth. I mean, that's the as Gandhian as you can get. But I mean, it raised a lot of questions as to then should we actually, as a conservation document, because the idea is to conserve and I forget the word, but for posterity. So, I mean, if we are doing that, that means we have to also suggest And how do you make drawings which actually should be process based rather than saying that it is this product? And these discussions were had, and part of the fun was that Professor Chaya and Tadip Bhai, always up to mischief, decided that they would get me to restore Gandhiji's bicycle. Now, you see, the problem is Gandhiji's bicycle is that, like any bicycle, when your brake lever gets loose, you put paper in the middle and tighten it, use it like a grome and so on. The problem is that in the bicycle that I got as an original, on the date that I received it, the paper that's actually put to tighten the bracket is a cigarette packet. Now, what will that say about Mr. Gandhi if we were to take it as a serious historical document? And these kind of very fun situations arose in the process of, that bicycle. And it raised questions because the people who helped me restore it were not me. And yet I got a huge disproportionate amount of credit for that exercise, which was done by somebody somebody on a roadside cycle shop. There was a sandblasting place in the middle of Gota, which is an industrial area in Ahmedabad. And all those processes disappeared. And it did bring up the issue that if you document in a particular manner for this conservation process, you could actually completely make invisible all the processes that are important to it. So, like, for example, I could document the entire cycle process without ever giving credit to the guys who actually did the work. And this would happen in a lot of Gandhi's buildings if you actually think about the materiality of those buildings and the processes that would be kind of required. And in that sense, the documentation, as pretty as it is in the book, is inadequate. If you were to look at it from a conceptual, philosophical point of view of what Mr. Gandhi was trying to tell us through these buildings. And these are things that were in conversation in fun manners. Like Tadip Bhai said, nobody's having this in the tone that I'm saying in this academic space. This conversation happening was cigarette packet and, that kind of thing. But if you start thinking about the cigarette packet seriously, there are conundrums of the entire conservation industry in India today that we face. The question of origins, etc., etc. So, I mean, this is just to give the students a sense that, we are all in discussion. There's a kind of dialogue going on. Nobody has any answers. The things that are coming up are raising all these issues. And the point is to have fun with it and not look for final solutions, as Professor Chaya started off with. That if Gandhi was looking for final solutions, we'd get a different kind of architecture.
And final solution is a very dangerous idea, as we know.
As we know.
Nothing is final. Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there are many questions from the audience as well. I would now pass the baton to Sonam Ambe, Principal at ASH and Project Director, Ethos Foundation, to take this forward. Over to you, Sonam.
Yeah, thanks, Manvita. I think there are a lot of questions, some of which are coming in the chat box, some as personal direct questions and messages to me. But we had earlier said that it will be a 11 to 12:30 session. So what we could do is we'll take in some comments and some questions. I'll give a formal vote of thanks. And then if it is okay with the speakers, we can still continue to informally continue the session because there are questions and there are people who'd like to listen to you. But there are
I will have to have a closure at 12:45 in any case. Unlike Professor Chaya and Riaz, I have to earn a keep. An upper divisional clerk is somebody who is bound by other people's timetable. So I'm have to go.
So chronologically going, I think we had some comments that Professor Satya would also like to share with everyone. Professor Satya Prakash Varanashi, could you please switch on your cameras and unmute?
Hey, thanks. But it's already kind of time up, so I'm not sure whether it's needed. But more than anything else, one noticed that there are a lot of students. So one wanted to, I'll be very, very brief. One wanted to share what one felt when one went to Sevagram. I had an opportunity of going to Vagamon House, Laurie Baker's first Kerala house, and also to Sevagram. And when once I was invited to give a Laurie Baker memorial talk, one looked at these two projects with slides and visuals, and made a very simple, call it as a comparison, not the best word. And it was titled as Aesthetics of Sustainability. Just picking up, I've just opened up that good old PPT. I don't know how many years old it is, but just picked up. Just I'll pick up 3 words which are maybe more easier for the students to realize. If they go to Sevagram, they would realize, maybe they'll realize more than that. Then there are another 3, 4 which I felt more intrinsically. The simple ones are 4 actually. So if you go to Sevagram, I mean, it's basically for students, you would realize that most of what we see there are need-based designs. Secondly, there are very, very minimum possessions in the Sevagram ashram. Second point. Third point is frugality and the functionality, the way they come together. Most of us know that when something is really frugal, it becomes hugely functional, or vice versa. Well, this also can be mentioned as at a student's level. That's, I mean, not really students and faculty or me or Chaya, so we all the same. I'm just saying it. The next line here is very easy to understand, is there's an elegance by simplicity. Of course, one also used the word aesthetics of sustainability a while ago. Elegance by simplicity. These were the 4 or 5 points which are part of the PPT. There's also similar ones for Laurie Baker, Vagamon House. But then there are 3 things which I personally felt. I just don't notice somebody has typed here. It has come from some Acer. Just want to share my experience with Gandhian architecture, happened to go to Sevagram, 10-minute silence, etc. I don't know who it is, but very, very similar experience. So last few words, when one into the interiors of these buildings in Sevagram, somebody else also mentioned for Gandhi, it was going into the self. A lot of philosophers and spiritual people have done that, or going into the self. So when you go into the interiors of the ashram buildings in Sevagram, it was very strange. It was not just interiors as in the physical sense, but at least to me, it was very introspective. So an interior which creates a kind of an introspective mood. And of course, I'm influenced both by Gandhi and by Laurie Baker, and equally by J. Krishnamurti. So it was not that I was walking in not knowing anything, having been influenced by these people. So there was this kind of a introspective mood which was created by the interior, which is something I felt very, very strongly. Chaya said in the beginning also, speaking about architecture, which I won't go into that again. Second line which is here is architecture of conviction. Can architecture express the conviction of the designer? Let me use the word designer now, as if Gandhi was a designer, but it's Gandhian philosophy. So that philosophy, conviction of the philosophy, how it gets expressed in architecture. That is second word which one likes to pick up and tell, architecture of conviction. And the third one, there I'll stop, a kind of an humbling ambience. An ambience which, there are a lot of areas, a lot of places where we get this humbling experience. And we go to a seashore, we get the humbling experience. But anyway, went to Sevagram and there was this kind of humbling experience there in Sevagram. Just want to share this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Satya, for your reflections. It means a lot to hear from our participants as well. We have some questions here from Tanmay and others, but I see the clock is ticking for Professor Tridip. So what,
I just wanted to say thank you very much. And I have to say what the other two will not say. It's a good book. Please buy it. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Since we have so many colleges in here, I'm sure the students inspired by the talk would look forward to it from the institutions as well. Professor Neelkant Chaya and Professor Riaz Tayabji, do we have your permission to go on a little and extend a little beyond the time?
Little bit. Give me 2 minutes and I'll be back.
Yes, then I'll just read out the vote of thanks to formally, kind of close this, and then we could meet in for some behind the scene discussions. So as we've kind of come to the semi-end of this insightful and inspiring session, I would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to our speakers. for their invaluable contributions. And what a humbling yet inspiring discussion this has been for us. So thank you to all the three of you. Of course, a big round of thanks to all the participants for joining us today and making this event a success. Thank you for joining us 15 minutes before the session began. That kind of showed in the lessons that you wanted to learn from our speakers today and the insights about the man and his places as well. So before we kind of close in, we wanted to also talk to you about some exciting opportunities. Saint Gobain Grants has been launched already. If you check out our website, www.ethosfoundation.in, you would see that we are opening out 6 opportunities for 6 innovators to be selected to create a real impact with their ideas. And these ideas could be just general design interventions in any with any social issue or problem under the 5 pillars of Saint Gobain Grants, which is sustainability, social responsibility, socio-cultural realm, digital innovation, new material and building technology. And each one of you would receive a funding or an award of 1 lakh rupees to execute this as a prototype first and execute the ideas that you have in for the community. And not just this, we're not limited only to the Saint Gobain grants. We have a few more grants that are going to be announced soon and launched soon. So we thought that just like this, we could host a special webinar on how to secure these ARCOS grants, where we will be inviting in past grantees to talk about their experiences, how they received the grants, but how they sent in and put down their proposals, and how that has changed life for them as well as the community towards which they and the society towards which they worked for. So join us on World Architecture Day, which is the 7th of October. It's a session which will be conducted in the evening. We'll paste in the details in the chat box as well, and you'll receive the notifications through our regular mediums of email, social media, and WhatsApp. So the intent here for Ethos has always been to give wings to your ideas and support your intervention. So I'll request all of you to please think about something creative, innovative that will make a difference in the world. And we are here to support you. So thank you everyone for for this insightful morning. And of course, no vote of thanks is complete without expressing a heartfelt appreciation to everyone involved from the team at Ethos's end. We have Arya and Manvita who joined us from their respective colleges, which are a part of our ARCOS clubs. But we're also incredibly proud of our amazing team, Preeti, Ankita, Arun, Shreya, Avneet, Achal, Asma. Each of you is truly a treasure of Ethos Foundation, and today's session wouldn't have been possible without your hard work and dedication. Now, with this, announcing the 15 colleges that join us today, that's Amity School of Architecture and Planning, BMS School of Architecture, Yelahanka, Jindal School of Architecture, Haryana, McGann's Ooty, MET Nashik, Mohammed Satak, Chennai, Pillu Modi College of Architecture, Cuttack, Rathinam from Tamil Nadu, School of Architecture, Reva University, Siddhaganga Institute of Technology, Campus School of Architecture. From Kolhapur, we have D.Y. Patil College of Architecture and Engineering Technology, Techno India from Calcutta, Northeastern Hill University in Shillong, WITS PVP College of Architecture in Pune, and Watson School of Architecture and Planning from Hyderabad. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us in. And can I please request the others who would like to continue this session and this discussion with us to stay back while there may be colleges who would have to move into the next lecture or session at their end academically. So thank you, everyone. Can we request the ones who are going to stay back to also type in your set of questions in the question in the chat box so that we could take them up? One question by Tanmay says that he asks how we can incorporate Gandhian architecture into our daily homes. Now, although part of this was covered through the many reflections that you shared with the students, if there's something very specific to homes that you would like to add, Professor Chaya and Professor Tayyabji?
Well, first of all, don't make it larger than required.
Mm.
And use all the things that are that are used, which don't use plastics, which don't use all kinds of highly processed materials. With that, you should be able to make a beginning, but then there is no end to how far you can go with that. So you can start with, but I think the main thing is not to use anything that you don't need to use. That's all. Not to even own anything that you don't need to use. Yes.
Does that answer your question, Tanmay?
Yes, it is. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The only thing that, like, ashrams are the kind of a places built for the community, and homes are like for family. That's the main gist behind this question, actually. And I received my answer. Thank you.
But I think if Tadip had been here, he would have, kind of looked at those two categories of family and ashram very carefully. In the sense that, I remember coming to Ahmedabad to live in Professor Chaya's house. And it was very much a family house. Sorry, sir, I'm going to use it as an example. But there was a larger ashram in some sense of people, which was the School of Architecture. And this is the way I look at it, a community of co-experimenters in the world of architecture that live. Now, the practices that were that Professor Chaya had at home were quite different from those that he had in the school. And I think this is something to be kind of thought through, that the home is a kind of apparatus in which certain practices and certain kind of relationships are nurtured. And then they must also make connections and continuities with other spaces of shared, how would you say, experimentation. And I think that one of the things is to kind of think carefully about these practices, but also what is shared, what is, and to what scale, if we look at it architecturally. I think that the scale of the family is important, but the scale of the ashram, which needed be a literal ashram as in Gandhi's case, but our space of work and living kind of co-joined, and the practices associated with it. And I just think that it's worth looking at the home and the house as just part of this apparatus that one is constantly fiddling with. Just like, I enjoy motorcycles and machines, and one is always fiddling with older machines, and now you can't fiddle with machines. They deny you that process of bringing the machine home. So either you have it or you don't have it. But the older machines you could tinker with, and Gandhiji used to tinker with everything. Tinker with the fountain pen, tinker with the spinning wheel. He made it more dynamic and tinkering means just like playing with it. And playing with it means a certain domesticity and familiarity. And I think that our homes must be that way. We must be tinkering them. We must be shifting the desk from here to there, and kind of trying, like, what if, and we've tried this, what if your son's bedroom is like everybody's rooms, and you will get a kind of response, and you will not, that proposition will go out of the window. So, etc., etc. But what I'm saying is different relationships. The problem, I think, is that we think about it in static terms. And that's what Professor Chaya was talking about, that the minute the categories that we are thinking with become static, then the options of how you will configure or think about your home also become static. And then it becomes kind of perhaps like what they say, role play. You are father, you are mother, you are son. And the house does not allow you to kind of adjust to those kind of changes, that when son becomes stronger than you, what happens? Fatherhood kind of changes, etc. So whatever. I'm just saying off the top of my head, but I'm just saying that the house and the home kind of has to be this responsive apparatus. And I find Professor Chaya's way of looking at the categories of the way we think about it very useful. And his house was a very important I think, example for me in this. In also, I use it as a reference to clarify when you see something like Gandhi's architecture and so on.
Thank you, Professor Riaz. Urvashi here has a very interesting question. Urvashi, if you're around, you'd like to unmute, maybe you could ask the question. You could switch on your camera. Okay. But because it's really good, I think I'm going ahead and asking her question. She wants to know that after working on the book, what are your thoughts about the 3 memorials for Gandhiji? The Gandhi Ghat Memorial by Habib Rahman, Gandhi Smarak by Charles Correa, and the Raj Ghat by Vanu Bhutan.
Well, I think as Tridip said, Gandhiji would never have required these, wouldn't have agreed with them, wouldn't have thought them necessary. But it is we who find it necessary to remember him maybe twice a year, do some ceremonies there, suddenly become serious about so many things which otherwise we are not, and so on. So they are good works of architecture in that each one of them in one way or another tries to respond to some aspect of Gandhi's thinking, basically to do with simplicity, basically also to do with the sky and nature and so on and so forth. But they are not Gandhian works. And I think that is quite all right. I could have a fight with each one of those architects. I had some with one of them, but it doesn't matter. Yeah.
No, I have similar thoughts, in the sense that you will remember that we did a study of Mr. Correa's building, and that is the one that I know most closely because it is in the vicinity, in the neighborhood, and one visits it all the time. But when one looks at it, and one appreciates the gestures that are made, the simplicity of it that comes from a different paradigm of thinking, and yet the kind of richness of that build. So, I mean, that goes without saying. But what surprised me when we looked at it closely in comparison with Hriday Kunj is how different the worlds are that they actually come from. So, I mean, that they are, as Professor Chaya said, that they can only encapsulate a few ideas at the best. And I think in that sense, Mr. Correa's is the one that encapsulates the most in some ways while doing the least. But the thing is, they can only represent those ideas. And the thing is that the buildings that are Mr. Gandhi's are those which are to be lived. And therefore, a memorial which in itself separates so that you can become aware of ideas will not be able to do that. So, I mean, this is the limitation of memorials, but it's just something I thought I'd share.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. The next question is from Arjun. Would you like to switch on your mic, please?
Yes, hi. Hi everyone. Just a minute, ma'am.
All the other devices will have to be switched off from their audios.
Yeah, hello, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. Myself, Arjun. I'm assistant professor at Ratnam School of Architecture and Design. So I also practice sustainable practices, and I also practice natural building techniques and all. So I as a faculty, I want to know how do we in this fast pacing world, how do we make the students think slow, or go slow with their design, and then design more consciously. like Chayazar was mentioning, like, the importance of walking, like, to slow, to see things little more slow, in this fast pacing world. So any insights on that, sir?
Well, first of all, one cannot make anyone go slow or fast.
Yes.
So that should be put aside. The way you do things can challenge someone. And for example, um, from my teachers, what I learned was the way they held the pencil or the piece of charcoal. Not much of what the words they used. So their actions were far more, they caught my attention. And I think this, if one wants slowness, then there can be so many ways of doing it. Maybe one has to play games in classes, of some kind of games, or something by which there is an impediment to speed. And I think speed is actually easy to achieve, and slowness is more difficult to achieve. And
Yes.
therefore, it will have to happen in more than one thing. Maybe even the food that they eat. You know, there are some things which you have to peel, and it takes such a long time to eat even one. But the taste of it is such that you manage to do it. I think something like that has to come. So there will have to be all kinds of experiments in the college. That's how I look at it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
The next question, can I invite Ria Bangar? She's typed in her question in the chat box. Ria, could you unmute yourself?
Yeah, hello, myself Ria from NIT Ravakela. My question is how did Gandhi's philosophy shape the architecture of his spaces, or did the architecture had influence on his ideas? Like how is the interplay, and has it evolved over time?
Yes, why don't you take that one?
So, no, Ria, I think the issue is that we tend to separate philosophy as something, as a set of thoughts or ideas that one has to clarify first, and then one will live in the building or give it shape. I think this is the question that Mr. Gandhi kind of is throws out of the window first. That it is in the living that one will ask questions, and questions and practices will coexist, and some questions will arise out of practice. The practicing means like simple things like brushing your teeth, eating food, going to toilet. He will ask social questions about going to toilet. He will ask social questions about brushing teeth as in hygiene. And then he will think that, okay, do I need any tools for it? And then those tools might lead to other apparatuses like architecture, etc., etc. And then this network of responding to those thoughts will lead to these things. And then these things, in the process of making them, they will clarify those thoughts or not. And this process is simultaneous. The idea that he had a philosophy itself is something that is constantly emergent. He is living it through from beginning to end. A lot of people don't look at him as a, in fact, it's, Tridib Bhai often says it's very difficult. Do you consider him a philosopher? Do you consider him spiritual? We consider him as father of the nation. That means he's political, but he denounces politics. I mean, what is this man? And he is only trying to be himself, and the architecture and the buildings that are wrapping around him are responding to how he sees himself at various points in time, and the ideas that he's kind of interested in. So I would look at it more in that way, that it's evolving as he evolves. So this is my way of thinking about it, in that sense that his behavior is very important. And he's clarifying why he behaves in a particular way, why he feels certain things, what his proclivities are or what his inclinations are. He's clarifying that with ruthless honesty, self-honesty. And he's asking people when he's writing, he writes about them, and he asks people to respond in public in the newspapers that he's editing, etc., etc. So he's asking people as to what do you think. He may or may not respond to it directly, but so in that process of clarifying his thoughts, behaviors, the world around him is taking shape, and he's shaping that world as he moves from ashram to ashram or place to place. Uh, and I think that in some sense, we are all doing that as well, but not perhaps with the same kind of concentration and focus as he did. So I don't think that we should have the burden of clarifying philosophy and then trying to prescriptively kind of achieve it. It's much more about how we want to kind of live.
Thank you, Professor Riaz. I think we have the last question here in the chat box. That's from Mr. Sudarshan. Can you please switch on your mic to ask the question?
Okay, so thanks for the opportunity. Mahatma Gandhi ji have some values, Satya, Ahimsa, and he has his own concept of God, Rama. He was Ramanishta. So in any sense, his architecture reflects the idea of Satya, Ahimsa, and his concept of Ram. So can we observe Satya, Ahimsa, and Ram in his architecture?
My sense
am I audible?
Yeah, I can. May I respond to that, sir? My sense is not. And I don't think that he would have liked us to recognize that. He says very clearly in his writings, and I would recommend reading Tridip Surud's introduction to his autobiography in a recent edition, in which he says that my relationship with God is mine, and therefore it does not come out into the social sphere in the manner that we talk about it in terms of a religious expression. That it influenced his social behavior is without doubt, but that he kind of expressed it as a religiosity, I think it is not there. He would have tried to hold it close to him. His spiritual relationship or his religious relationship is an internal conversation with his maker. He writes it in that manner.
Yeah. So I think that as far as Satya is concerned, it is something to do with phenomena which are happening around us and in us. And for Satya, you can have perception of it, and you always hold it as something which is possibly going to change if you find that there is something wrong with it. So to be alive to Satya requires one to be open. Similarly, ahimsa, to be the idea of, in fact, there's a very interesting thing that he wrote this book called, what was it? The
Experiments with Truth.
No, the other one, Hind Swaraj, which was written in Gujarati. And the word ahimsa arises here in the Gujarati. When he wrote the same book, this is the only book that he himself has translated into English. When he wrote it in English, the word ahimsa comes out as love. As love.
Not as non-violence.
Not as non-violence, not as a negative thing, but as love. So therefore, and Ram is of course something which is inside you. And Riaz is absolutely right that each person's Ram will be all the time found by the same person And that Ram will be very different for you and for me even. And it's not a kind of thing that we can throw out into the public sphere. It is something that is intensely inward. And so in that sense, Gandhi's search for the social is different for the search for the spiritual. And the spiritual is, he keeps it intensely his own, and he points to his chest and says, "Where is the truth?" Somebody asked him. And he said, "For him, for me, it is here. For you, it will be also there." So I think that is where we should perhaps end our conversation.
Yes. In fact, we did get a additional question, which is which is kind of linked with it. Yash Arora from DY Patil Kolhapur. He says that he's a final year student from Maharashtra, and in today's world where nothing is going legally, in terms of modern context of sanctioning process of architecture, municipal plants, or grant of electricity from MSEB, or any alternative work that needs to be done from the corporation. I see there is so much corruption everywhere. Though, how does one, practice? How should an architect practice satyagraha, the love and the non-violent resistance in this modern context?
I think Mr. Gandhi would have just lived off the grid.
Yes. Actually, Prem Chandavarkar has recently given a lecture on satyagraha for architects.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
I will just see where that came from.
Yeah, I don't know where it came from. It was AI.
Yes, it was.
Yes. So anyways, he's going to give the same talk in Ahmedabad. And let's see, we'll listen to that talk and then maybe answer this question.
Yes. For sure. So with this, I think we've come to a close of today's session as we reflect on the discussions dedicated to Mahatma Gandhi. We are reminded of his principles of simplicity, sustainability, and respect for the environment and people. Gandhiji's life and thoughts continue to inspire most in the world of architecture, urging us to create spaces that not only serve our needs, but also honor the natural world and look at the balance of what is the definition of the needs in itself. So thank you once again to everyone for joining us today. And we've received some beautiful sketches from Professor Mayuresh Shirodkar of Brick Institute. Please allow me to share them with you. This is the one of Professor Nilkant Chaya. Just a minute. Yes, this one is Riaz. And here we have Pradip. So I think it's really nice how the community comes together to listen to such valuable discussions. We do have a lot of them saying that they're looking forward to your book and will pick it up from the library as well as the bookstores. So thank you. Thanks a lot for joining us. And we'll stay.
All of you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you, sir.
See you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Sonam.
Bye.